The Buddha's wisdom on what you can't change and what you must. We've gotten this far in life. We've probably noticed that there are some things we can change and some things we can't. It's something so obvious and yet something we tend to overlook. We keep pushing against things that can't be changed, and we neglect the things that we can change, where we can make a difference. This is why the Buddha taught the brahmaviharas, or the sublime attitudes, as a set. Qualities of unlimited goodwill, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, with the realization that some of them will be appropriate at some times and others appropriate at others. There's no one attitude you take all the way all the time. Wisdom comes in knowing which attitude to apply in any given situation. You start out with goodwill. That's your basic default mode. A wish for happiness, a wish for true happiness, your true happiness, the true happiness of those around you. You try to maintain that attitude. Goodwill is the first step on the path. There's an image in the canon of a mother looking after her child. It's not the case that you're going to love all the world the same way she would love her child. That's impossible. But you try to look after your attitude of goodwill the same way she would look after her child. If anything threatens to weaken it, you want to be right there. Because if you lose your goodwill, you lose. You start acting in ways that are harmful to yourself, harmful to other people. And that doesn't help anything at all. If you see people who are suffering or people who are doing things that are going to lead to suffering, and you want it to change, that's compassion. You see yourself doing stupid things that lead to suffering. You want that to change too. That's compassion for yourself. Empathetic joy is when you see people who are happy or who are doing the things that lead to happiness, and that includes yourself. You don't resent other people's happiness. You don't resent the good they've done. You don't feel that you're in competition with them. When you do something skillful, you can enjoy it. The Buddha says that that's an important part of the practice. Sometimes we feel embarrassed about looking at our own goodness. But if you're embarrassed about your goodness, you're not likely to do any. We're not doing it to gloat or to compare ourselves with other people. We simply want to see ourselves progressing and to take joy in the fact that we're progressing. These are all the attitudes we can have toward things that can change. There are things that, for the time being, look like they can't change, but we have these attitudes toward them. Those are underlying attitudes we should try to develop for all beings. Now, you may think of some people who you don't easily feel goodwill for, but again, if there's a gap in your goodwill, then there's a gap in your skillfulness, a gap in the extent to which you can trust yourself. So when you extend goodwill to others, it's not because other people are innately good or because other people deserve goodwill. You need the goodwill to be able to trust yourself. Contemplating change, awakening to impermanence. The problem, of course, is that there are times when things can't change. You see someone who's suffering or who's doing things that lead to suffering, and you can't help them for one reason or another. It's either your karma or their karma. That's when you have to develop equanimity, with the realization there are some things in the world that are not going to change. There's going to be aging, illness, and death. As soon as there's birth, then aging, illness, and death have to come. If you get worked up over things you can't change, you waste energy that could be devoted to things that can change. So equanimity means learning acceptance, but not for everything. It means acceptance of things that you've tried to change and you realize they won't change. So you pull back and ask yourself, where can I be of help? What changes can I make? And you try to focus there. The wisdom lies in seeing where you draw the line. At what point do you have to say, okay, on this issue, I've got to be equanimous. Things are not going to change. At least they're not going to change right now. I have to put them aside for the time being. That kind of insight comes with experience. There's no quick rule of thumb aside from the fact that if you find yourself up against aging, illness, and death, you're up against a big enemy, things that are not going to easily change. But you realize that in your own case, you can do something about whether you're going to suffer over those things or not. The Buddha talks about two kinds of stress or suffering. There's the stress or suffering that comes simply from the fact that things are changing. They depend on causes, they depend on conditions, and causes and conditions are always changing. If you try to place your happiness on those things, it's going to get tipped over. That's one kind of suffering, one kind of stress. But then there's the stress that comes from our own craving, our own ignorance. We shape our experience in ways that are really not all that skillful. We're not paying very careful attention to how we shape our experience. We crave for things to be a way that they can't be. Or even when we crave for things to be a way they can be, those things are going to change on us. And that ultimately leads to disappointment. That disappointment is what you've got to look into because that's something you can change. So as you're focusing on the breath, try to see what lessons you can learn about change and not change, the stress you can't do anything about, and stress you can do something about. When you're sitting here breathing, how much awareness do you actually bring to the breathing process? Is it clear? And when you breathe in and breathe out, what notions do you have in your mind? What pictures do you have in your mind about how the breath is moving in the body or how it can move in the body? Some of those pictures you picked up from your own experience, some from textbooks. But are they the best pictures to carry in mind right now? Can you change the picture? What happens when you do? When you think about breath, what kinds of sensations are you thinking about? Can you expand that range a bit? Because not all breath sensations move. Some of them are still. Ajahn Lee talks about 3 levels of breath. There's the basic in and out breath. Then there's the subtler breath that flows through the bloodstream, flows through your nerves. And then there's a still breath that you can notice at certain spots in the body. These levels are like different frequencies of breath energy, in the same way that there are different frequencies of radio waves going through the air right now. When you hold that picture in mind, can you sense these various energies? Can you tune into them? There are a lot of things that are there in the body right now, a lot of signals being sent that we're missing simply because we're not prepared to believe that they can be there. It's like that story they tell about the ozone hole. Satellites were picking up data about the ozone hole over Antarctica for years and years. But the computer software analyzing the data wasn't programmed to believe that such a thing could happen. That wasn't a possibility that the number crunchers had thought of. So the software rejected the data. It wasn't until the data were overwhelming that they began to realize, okay, there was a problem with the software. Our awareness of our body and our awareness of our mind are often like that. Things are going on, but our sense of the possibilities of what can go on can be very limited. So try to open the mind, ventilate the mind a little bit to get an idea of what can be done, what can be changed. That way, you'll be able to sit here with the breath. If the breath is going well, you keep it going well. That's your empathetic joy. If it's not going well, you can change it. That's your compassion. It's all motivated by basic goodwill. You want to be able to develop a sense of happiness that doesn't have to depend on outside conditions. You start with the breath and then move into the body. From there, you move into the mind, into the sense of awareness right here. You want to develop this as much as possible. You want to develop your sensitivity of the present moment as much as possible so that you can see subtle movements of the mind. Those are the things that are causing that unnecessary stress, and those are the things that can be changed. We take our greed, aversion, and delusion for granted. We take our normal everyday state of mind for granted, thinking that that's the way things are, and yet that's something that can be changed. So we have to stop and take stock. What are the things we can change? What are the things we can't? The fact that things are inconstant, stressful, not self, that's not going to change, but you can push against that a bit. You can create this state of mind that's more constant, that has a sense of ease, a sense of well-being, and that is to some extent under your control. Then you use that to look deeper into the mind to see, where are these subtle movements? Where's the movement of craving? Where's the movement of ignorance? Can you detect when the level of stress in the mind is going up, when it goes down? The greater the sense of ease you can develop with the meditation, the more sensitive you become to these things. When the level of stress goes up in the mind, what did you just do? You have to look at this again and again and again to be on top of things. But it is possible to see that there are these movements of the mind, the perceptions and labels you put on things, the thoughts you put together. These are the big culprits, so these are the things you want to watch out for. You begin to realize that even though there are a lot of things in the world you would like to change and you discover that they can't be changed, there are other things that you thought would never change, but they can. One of the reasons we're meditating is to learn these lessons and take advantage of the things that we can change and stop beating our heads against the things that can't. Because the area where we can make a difference turns out to be the most important part. Equanimity in action, equanimity at rest. Equanimity, the ability to keep the mind on an even keel in the face of pleasant and unpleasant things, to accept what has to be accepted, is an attitude we're supposed to develop immeasurably. In other words, for all beings without exceptions. But it has a different meaning based PM whether we're talking about equanimity in action or equanimity at rest. At rest, it's a topic of concentration. You sit here resting in the equanimity that you can extend to everyone all over the world, regardless. Equanimity for yourself, equanimity for others. That's possible only from the fourth jhana on up. Prior to that, equanimity has to be in action, and it's immeasurable in a different way. Whatever you need to feel equanimity for, no matter how easy or how hard, you're able to do it. This will depend on the situation because remember, equanimity is never taught as a quality on its own. It's always part of a series of qualities. In the 4 brahmaviharas, you need to develop it together with goodwill, compassion, and empathetic joy. You have to be able to draw on each of those when appropriate. So it's immeasurable in that way, as a skill where you can give rise to equanimity when you have to, regardless. At the same time, it's selective. You focus it on certain things and not on others. For example, when you're trying to get the mind to settle down in concentration, you have to have equanimity for the world so that you can focus on what you're doing right now. You have to have equanimity for the fact that you've got this body, whatever the physical conditions it has right now, but you don't just leave it there. You accept what you've got so that you can work with it. It's like going into the kitchen and finding that there's nothing but celery in the refrigerator. So you try to figure out what are some good things you can make out of celery. Or when there's nothing but a potato, you can't just eat the potato as it is. Celery you can pretty well eat as it is. Potatoes, though, you have to fix. If you eat a raw potato, it's actually poisonous. In a case like that, you accept the fact that that's what you've got, but then you do something with it. Out of compassion for yourself, compassion for others, or goodwill for yourself, goodwill for others. So the equanimity is selective, even more so as you're out dealing with people. There are some situations where you realize you can't make a difference, or you could make a difference, but it might not be worth it. Some people listening to the brahmaviharas say that they sound like the serenity prayer, wanting the ability to accept what you can't change, the courage to change what you can change, and the discernment or wisdom to know the difference. But life is a lot more complicated than that. There are a lot of things that you could change but wouldn't be worth it. And that requires real discernment. After all, Even though we try to have equanimity and goodwill for everyone, our resources are limited. The attitudes may be unlimited, but our resources are not. In terms of your time, your energy, your monetary resources, there are limitations. So you have to figure out, given the limitations, what's the best use of what you've got? There may be some areas where you have to choose which battle you're going to fight. You can't fight two at once, or maybe you can fight two but you can't fight three. You have to gauge your strength. Focus on the battles that are most worthwhile to win and develop some equanimity for those that are not. So here again, equanimity is selective, immeasurable in the sense that you have to apply it whenever appropriate, but selective in where you apply it at any one time. Equanimity is not resignation. And as I said, equanimity in action is something applied in daily life, and even when you sit down to meditate. When the Buddha was telling Rahula to make his mind like earth, he was basically teaching selective equanimity. Rahula wasn't supposed to be earth-like toward everything in his meditation. That attitude was to be reserved for whatever was unpleasant. This was the instruction the Buddha gave to Rahula before he taught him meditation. And breath meditation is not simply sitting there accepting whatever breath comes up. You work with the breath. You train yourself. You train yourself to breathe in a way where you're aware of the whole body, or where you can calm bodily fabrication. Breathe in a way where you can be sensitive to rapture, sensitive to pleasure. These things don't happen on their own. They come from seeing what you've got, accepting what you've got, and then seeing that there are possibilities for change in what you've got. Remember, the Buddha's view of the world is not static. It's not a matter of things just as they are. It's more things as they're functioning. Because things function, they have potentials. So you want to figure out what those potentials are and make the most of them. There's a lot you can do with the breath. There's a lot you can do with the simple fact that the mind talks to itself. That can actually become a factor of jhana. When directed thought and evaluation are listed as a factor of jhana, they seem exotic and strange. Some people say, how do I start directing my thoughts and how do I evaluate? Well, you're doing these things all the time. You think about a topic, that's directing your thoughts. You make comments on it, that's evaluating it. In concentration, it's simply a matter of now learning how to apply these activities to the breath and keep them with the breath, to keep the conversation on topic. Don't let it wander off into other areas, and learn how to evaluate wisely. As Ajahn Lee points out in the factors for the first jhana, directed thought is basically concentration. Singleness of preoccupation is concentration. But the evaluation is the beginning of your discernment as you try to get things to fit together. You don't simply accept what's there. You accept what's there so that you can work with it. When things settle down to the point where you don't have to talk so much about them anymore, the mind is with the breath is with the mind. It seems as if your awareness and the object of your awareness become one. Then you can drop the directed thought and evaluation. Stop the chatter and just be asterisk with the sensation of the breath coming in, going out. Think of it welling up from within the body. The Buddha's image is of a spring at the base of a lake. It's water welling up to cool the entire lake. You might hold that image in mind and then allow it to go still. The next image is of lotuses immersed in the water of the lake. The lake is still and the lotuses are saturated with water from their roots to their tips. The breath grows still, saturating the body, and then finally, it gets to the point where it stops. That's where you're at equanimity, at rest. There's nothing you have to do at that point aside from maintaining what you've got. Use it as a place for the mind to rest. After all, this is the level of concentration where the Buddha gained awakening. So it's a good foundation. It's the level of concentration from which he entered total nibbana, so it's a good place to rest, to get your bearings. It's at this point where your equanimity can be totally all around. But of course, you can't stay here forever. So a large part of the skill of equanimity is realizing when you can be at rest with it, when you have to apply equanimity in action, and how the two differ. Equanimity at rest is total, all around. Equanimity in action has to be selective. A large part of your discernment lies in figuring out where and when to apply it, and where and when to apply the other brahmaviharas. When you understand this point, you can avoid a lot of the mistakes that come when thinking you simply have to accept everything. There's that idea if you want things to be different from the way they are. That's craving, and craving's a cause of suffering. And you shouldn't do that. But if you can't want things to be different from the way they are, how are you going to follow the path? How are you going to develop anything on the path? The path has to be motivated by desire. After all, with right effort, you generate desire to give rise to skillful qualities, to abandon unskillful qualities. That's a case where you don't simply accept what's there and leave it there. You accept what's there and try to develop its potentials. You extend equanimity to everything that's not related to what you're trying to accomplish right now, but keep your desire for change focused on what you're doing. When you understand this point, you avoid a lot of the misunderstandings that come up around equanimity. As the Buddha said, equanimity is not always appropriate. If you simply develop equanimity while you're meditating, it's like a goldsmith who never puts the gold in the fire and never blows on it. He just looks at it. Nothing's going to happen to the gold when you just look at it. You put it in the fire. That's the effort of the practice. You blow on it. That's concentration. And you learn to figure out when is the appropriate time to do which task. Then you try to apply the same lessons to your daily life. There are areas where you have to really work hard at things to make changes. You have to stay focused there. There are other areas that you just have to let go because they're going to distract you from the real work. It's through understanding where equanimity is skillful and unskillful that you can develop a lot of discernment, both inside and out. Understanding goodwill and equanimity. The sublime abidings start with goodwill and end with equanimity. In a sense, there's a hierarchy there. Equanimity is more peaceful than goodwill, but without the goodwill, equanimity turns into indifference and coldness, which I don't think is what the Buddha had in mind when he was teaching equanimity. You have to start with goodwill, a desire for happiness, a happiness that's lasting, a happiness that's harmless. Part of being harmless is that you realize if your happiness does harm somebody else, they're not going to stand for it, so it's not going to last. So harmless and lasting go together, and go. You have to think about what that means in terms of goodwill. It's not that by spreading thoughts of goodwill to others we say, may you be happy simply as you are, whatever you're doing. If people are doing unskillful things, we hope that they can change their ways. If we're able to help in that endeavor, we're happy to help. This counteracts the ill will we sometimes feel when we see someone harming people we love or people we're concerned about. There's part of the mind that says, I'd like to see them suffer a little bit to get a taste of what they've been handing out to other people. But think about it. Often when people are suffering from their unskillful actions, they don't stop. They can often become even more and more unskillful. So, ideally, you're hoping that they develop an understanding, along with the willingness and the ability to act on the understanding. At the very least, the understanding is the important part. Think about what that means. We're wishing for happiness, and what it comes down to is that we're wishing that people develop understanding. The sublime attitudes and the Four Noble Truths are not separate. All too often, the sublime abidings are treated as something separate from the Four Noble Truths. There was a book years back, What the Buddha Taught, that treated the four sublime abidings as an addendum tacked onto the end, because they didn't seem to fit in with the rest of the discussion, which was on the Four Noble Truths. But that's not the case. Goodwill is intimately connected with right view. As the Buddha said at one point, if you have ill will for anyone, you've got wrong view. Wherever there's any sense of resentment, any desire for revenge, that's wrong view. One of the phrases we chant is, Sabe Sata Averahantu, may all beings be free from animosity. The word animosity here, vera in Pali, it's hard to get a precise equivalent in English. It's basically the animosity that comes when two people have been mistreating each other and they just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You did it to me. Now I'm going to do it to you. That kind of attitude. It's very closely related to the desire to get revenge. And this can go on for lifetime after lifetime. This is why an important part of goodwill is also forgiveness. There was an article recently saying that forgiveness has no role in the teaching of karma. It's true that your forgiving someone else for having abused you is not going to erase their karma. You're not the owner of their karma, but forgiveness does help avoid future unfortunate actions. You realize that this back and forth has gone on long enough. You're not going to try to continue it. You're not going to try to get back at the other person. So you forgive them for the last instance and make up your mind that you're going to pose them no danger. The word abhaya, at least in Thai, is used to mean forgiveness. It literally means danger-free. So forgiveness, goodwill, understanding, all these qualities go together. As they get applied to specific cases, they turn into compassion and empathetic joy. In other words, if you see people who are doing something really unskillful or are suffering the results of unskillful actions, you feel compassion for them. If you see people who are doing things that are skillful and will lead to happiness or are already experiencing happiness, you're happy for them. There's no resentment, no jealousy. These attitudes all go together. Equanimity stands a little bit apart. It's the realization that if you want for there to be happiness, but it's not happening, there's going to be pain. The Buddha describes that as renunciate pain, especially when it's related to your own practice, but also when you're feeling goodwill for others and you see that they're simply not going to be happy. We say, may all beings be happy, be happy, be happy. But when you look at people, you see that they're doing a lot of things that are not going to lead to happiness, and they're not going to change. If you don't develop equanimity, there's going to be a lot of suffering. This is for your own protection and for the protection of the other person. Sometimes your efforts at helping can get pretty desperate and do more harm than good. Or in your desire to get along, your desire to do what people want, you can do harm. There are times when what they want is not the right thing, so you have to pull out and develop some equanimity for the fact that they may resent your pulling out or not helping them in the way they want to be helped. But again, equanimity, like goodwill, has to be based on understanding. The realization that you're not giving up on the search for happiness, simply that you're focusing it on areas where it'll have an effect. The primary effect, of course, is going to be in your own actions. If you find that you're doing something unskillful, that's not an area where you can have equanimity, to be content with it, or to say, well, this is the way I have to be. You've got to do what you can not to give in to those unskillful habits. I've met a lot of people who say, give me some time. It's going to take me a while to start getting more skillful in my actions. But it's not a question of our giving those people time. The question is, do they have that time? That figure of death that we see in cartoons doesn't wait around and say, this person has had enough time to get their act together, so now I'll come and visit. Death can come at any time, unannounced, unbidden. In terms of your own actions, if you see that you're doing something unskillful, you need lots of goodwill for your desire for true happiness. Tell yourself, I'm not going to keep on giving in to my unskillful desires. I've got to do something about this. Where the equanimity comes in terms of your own experience is when you're dealing with the results of past bad actions that you can't change. You have to accept that this is the way things are. There are certain things you can't work your way around. But even there, you've got to figure out, how do I not suffer from this? You need to have some acceptance for what you can't change. Then there's the next step, which is that even though there's pain and I've learned to accept that there's going to be pain, how do I not suffer from the pain? That's something different. It requires more wisdom, more understanding. Learning how to separate the pain, if it's a physical pain, from your awareness, and to separate the pain from your sense of the body. That's when you can free the mind, again, through understanding. So you use less willpower in terms of generating equanimity there, and more understanding to cut through the connections that would cause suffering. As for your dealings with other people, you focus on the people you can help, saving equanimity for cases where you can't. So all the brahmaviharas, all the sublime abidings, require understanding so that they really lead to the happiness we want. And the happiness we want is one that spreads itself around. It's not like the happiness of the world, based on gaining status, gaining fame, gaining wealth, where when one person gains, somebody else has to lose. With the happiness that comes from the practice, we gain. The people around us gain. As we gain in wisdom, in compassion, in purity of our actions, we cause less suffering to others and can actually bring them a measure of happiness. I've talked to some people who've said that simply knowing that there's a monastery here in Southern California where people are practicing warms their hearts, even though they can't come. So you never know to what extent your practice is going to have a good effect on somebody else. Just be confident that the goodness does spread around. Some people are more receptive, some people are less, but it does spread around.